What should we think about nuclear power? Is paying your taxes the most patriotic thing you can do? And if you question dropping the atom bomb on Japan, does that mean you hate America? We'll discuss these questions and more on today's episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. This is the show where we go through our social media feeds, find takes that we find interesting, and we critique or praise them. My name is Britt. I'm here with my co-host Donnie. Before we get started, make sure to like, share, leave a comment. You can find us on Instagram at Good Take, Bad Take Pod and Twitter and YouTube at Good Bad Take Pod. And without further ado, let's get into some of these takes. So the first one we've got is from the Redeemed Zoomer, and they write on X, homeschooled kids are either reading War and Peace at age 11 or people who think the sun goes around the earth. There is no in between. What do you think, Donnie? You were homeschooled till 8th grade, right?
Till 9th, and then in 10th, okay. I transferred. Yeah, no, I think this is a good take. It's humorous. There's some merit to it. I think it's hyperbolic intentionally.
Yes.
What I would say though is the interesting thing is the vast majority of people that are homeschooled aren't identifiable as such unless it is in exceptional ways.
Yes.
I think
for better or worse, like they're trying to say here.
Yeah, well, the stereotype is often like, oh, when you meet a homeschooled kid, you'll know. And that's actually not true. The vast majority of my friends, even though we definitely hung out in ways that were maybe not conforming to the total norms of people around us and in the broader culture, if we were in some kind of a context where we were intermixed, it would not be immediately obvious in the way that those sort of the memes or the stereotypes have. The ways that you actually do see them stand out most of the time is through excelling in academics and in responsibility, in social maturity, especially in interacting with adults at higher proficiency levels and things like that. So it's heavily skewed. And when it comes to the skew of the person you're like, okay, that person's homeschooled, and you call them out, I would say that there is, there's a spread of those two. Like there's a decent amount where it's like, yeah, they just didn't have enough socialization, and that will be something that they will learn over time as they interact with people in the world, and maybe they're a little bit slower at it. There are some people who homeschooling is a form of neglect for, and so there are detrimental bad effects for those people. That does happen. And then there's also people who would say something like the sun goes around the earth or flat earther, and even if they're wrong, even in that case, I would say there's a defense in that it's because they are willing to not fit into the social conformity.
Yes.
There's, a lot of the people who would believe in round earth or flat earth or deny flat earth, and I'm not a flat earther, to be clear, but most people who deny flat eartherism is not because they've done any studies. It's because 100% because of the social pressure around them. Because even saying like, well, I haven't actually done any studies on this, so I guess I'm open to it being a flat earth, even just saying that would put you in a socially awkward situation. You would get ridiculed and mocked. So most people aren't even willing to do that. And so even if there are the kids who are, awkwardly holding on to defiant beliefs, conspiracy theories that are maybe a little bit ridiculous to hold on to, not that all conspiracy theories are, but, those that maybe are a little bit eccentric even for that term, there at least is a willingness to nonconformity that I think is good and appreciated. So even as this is, a little hyperbolic and tongue-in-cheek, there is truth to it. But I think that the heavy skew here is the homeschooled kids reading War and Peace at age 11.
Yes.
And the funny thing about that is I literally, growing up, had a friend who read War and Peace. I don't know if it was exactly age 11, but it was anywhere from 11 to 14.
Nice. Yeah. I wasn't quite War and Peace, but like I was like Robinson Crusoe and a lot of those like cool adventure novels that are like a lot of people don't even start reading until they're in high school. And the reason I would read them is because my parents said, hey, for every book you read, full book, like actual like 200, 300 plus pages, you get 30 minutes of TV time. So you can believe that I was reading as much as I could because I was like, I need to stack this time up so I can watch Arthur. And my parents got the better end of the deal for sure in that way. And I ended up loving books and everything. But yeah, I wasn't exactly War and Peace at age 11. But I kind of fall into... And I always felt this way. I always felt like the mediocre homeschool kid, which is like kind of rare. Like I'm not like one of my friends graduated college at 16 and went to work at Microsoft and was making hundreds of thousands of dollars because he was just a freaking brilliant computer engineer. And then there are other people that were unschooled and then like they're my age now. I'm 30 and they probably don't have their driver's license. Like I wouldn't put it past them to not have a driver's license, and they're
Right.
probably still live with their parents and haven't integrated into society. So those are, like you're saying, those are kind of the extremes. I think I'm kind of in the mediocre part. You're
Same.
fairly exceptional.
No, I
But
would put myself in that as well.
so I always felt like kind of the lame homeschooler, in that way. But as you were talking about like flat Earth, and this person obviously kind of mentions that, I think one of the things that is key about homeschooling is that in math, when math was really good, at least, like, and maybe this isn't true in public school, but I assume it is, like they have that phrase like show your work. Like they don't
Mhm.
really care if you just got the right answer, but it's like, hey, show me how you got to the right answer in math. Homeschooling is show your work, but not just for math, but for every single topic that you study. When it's done right, and in general, it's probably that way. So whether it's history or any sort of science experiment, or you're doing some sort of literature, it's not enough to just get the right answer. Like you've got to show your work. And it made me think of this clip that I saw from this movie called Captain Fantastic. I haven't actually
Oh.
seen the movie.
Oh, I have.
You have? Okay. Is it good? I don't. The clip I saw was awesome, but
It's good and bad. I
okay.
don't like the overall conclusion it comes to, which is like you need a bit of both, kind of. But
Mm.
it has merits.
Okay. Well,
It's
there's this
enjoyable.
one awesome clip in it, and like Viggo Mortensen, I think, is like the dad, and his daughter comes in, and they're like comparing public schooler to homeschooler, and they ask the public school kids like, "Hey, explain the Constitution," and they can't really do it, and then he brings his daughter in, and she like rattles off a bunch of facts, and he stops her. He's like, "Oh no, that's memorized knowledge. Like actually explain." Different types of arguments about it, and she rattles those off, and that is actually pretty representative, in my opinion, of what homeschooling is. And so what you have to realize is that like homeschoolers, when they look at the world and when they look at any sort of thing that's told to them, they're not going to just be like, oh, well, you're the authority, I'm going to accept it. They're going to be like, well, show me your work, or prove it to me. And I have a friend. I've done a lot of business with him. He's an awesome dude, makes a ton of more money than probably anyone listening to the show makes. And he is a flat earther, and he's really smart, man. He's awesome. He's really great. I grew up with him and love him to death. I'm not necessarily a flat earther, but like when I'm able to like explain why people believe that the earth is flat, or why people believe that we haven't been to the moon. Whereas like I was talking with someone about this just the other day, and they kind of sneered at like, oh, what do you mean we haven't been to the moon? I was like, well, like I think maybe in the strongest argument for the fact that the moon landing was fake is that how are they going to be able to transmit all of that video footage and control the cameras and all these things from the moon back to the planet Earth? And we haven't really been back there since, and all this different stuff. Not saying that I believe that. It's like maybe what makes more sense to me is that they did land on the moon, but they weren't able to record it. But for propaganda purposes, they had to show that we did, so they re-recorded it here on Earth. And someone, they're like, oh, okay, like I never thought of that, like maybe being like the explanation. It's like, yeah, I'm not saying that's what I believe. I'm just saying like that's an explanation that I can make as an argument for why people believe this. And like homeschoolers in general are going to be really good at doing that. And that's why because you do that, sometimes you get it wrong, right? Like you could get it wrong. And if you get it wrong, but you have such a strong argument that you formulated and no one is really challenging you on it, and you kind of contend to head off in the wrong direction. Like if you just kind of point the ship in the wrong number of degrees one way, like, yeah, you could become someone that has it, flat earth or whatever. I'm not saying that like flat earth isn't true or is right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm just saying that's why homeschoolers that are generally exceptional and brilliant and make tons of money and are successful in all sorts of areas of life can sometimes err in some places, because it generally will create people who have extreme abilities to think one way or the other.
I think the key distinction there is that, the analysis versus memorization too. And
Yeah.
that's why in general, the people who, and I don't have any studies on this in particular, but I think you can pretty generally make this assumption safely. So if someone comes out with studies that prove me wrong, I'll take this back. But I don't think it will be that controversial to assert. If you did a study of homeschool families or homeschoolers themselves, I would say the vast majority probably did not off rip trust the vaccine for
Yeah.
COVID-19, right? And
Oh, definitely not.
well, again, I don't have any numbers to back me up here, but I think it's a pretty safe assumption. And the again, that distinction of memorized knowledge versus analysis it makes you think when the science, quote unquote, was telling us what was safe and not, and people said, well, you're just asserting these things, and you're not allowing the debate to go back and forth. You're not allowing analysis to happen. So the people who are just making fun of people who didn't want to take the vaccine or who were skeptical or anything about COVID, not even just the vaccine, they would repeat the memorized talking points. Now, and you ask them to expand, you ask them any sort of question like, why doesn't herd immunity take effect or precedence like it would in every other disease? And they couldn't respond
Yeah.
because there wasn't analysis there. Now, there might be actual responses to that from hardcore believers, and that's fine. We can have those debates. I think it tends to not be that great of a response, but the vast majority of people who again were sneering, like you were saying, and mocking that attitude is taken when memorization is in place from
Yeah.
these talking points, not from analysis. I don't know how many people remember from any English class you've been in high school or college. Our friend John and I always laughed because we were in a college class together for the epic, and we would start every English epics and non-English epics throughout history, and we would start every class off with someone giving a chapter analysis from the reading that we'd
Oh
done.
boy.
And there was one person in particular who he thought he was just the smartest guy ever, and every single time he was asked to give analysis, he would give the chapter summary. And and John and
Yeah.
I were just like, dude, like we're bashing our heads against the wall practically. Like, man, that is not analysis. And so yeah, so that distinction is key, and I think that you're right. That's one of the fundamental things that homeschooling often allows you to teach in a more effective manner than you can necessarily get in public school. Not to say every public schooler is dumb and
Yeah.
every public schooler can't do that. I'm just saying that when you are able to individualize curriculum, when you're not as fast as the slowest member of the class, when you can do these things, you get these traits a lot. And that's the other thing I will say really quickly is that homeschooled kids are easy to point out on these two extremes, but if you look at the skew, I think the skew is heavily in the positive direction. And you look at so many kids who are being failed and left behind by the public school system, not because they're stupid, not because they're dumb, but because the public school system is so broken that a lot of people are being dropped and they're failing. I would reference Rob Henderson for instance. He's a brilliant guy who got into Yale and had no idea that he could do that because he was a really smart kid, but the schools were just not working for him
Yeah.
and not letting him behind. He had a rough upbringing. And so, people talk about all these cases where you need public schools for the people who aren't privileged, who don't have good family lives. The people who don't have good family lives and are underprivileged are being left behind in the public school system disproportionately already. That's already happening, and to really bad degrees. The public school system is not helping catch these use cases that they will always cite as why homeschooling or private schooling would ever. You couldn't do that society wide. What about these kids? And it's like you look, and in the immortal words of Larry Sharp, that's the dystopia is now. That's
Yes.
what we're living in. So
Yeah. My last point on this, I was privy to witness a conversation between my buddy and someone that didn't believe in, like I said, had been sneering at it. And I at some point, the phrase like, well, I'll believe it when I see it came up, and it kind of went further down the line with the conversation. And that person that was sneering at my friend said something like, it's like, oh, well, we know, like, we have telescopes. You can look up in the sky and see, Mars and Jupiter, and you see that they're round, and like infer that based on this and this and that, the planet is the globe that we expect it to be. And my buddy's like, he's like, oh, well, so have you looked at through a telescope and seen it yourself? If seeing is believing, and the person obviously hadn't, right?
Yeah.
And that's not to say that if you did look through a telescope, you wouldn't see those things that they're claiming. But this person had, like you're saying, memorized knowledge. And they're like, oh, I guess I haven't like actually done that. Like I've just kind of taken it for granted that this is the way it is because someone told me it. But it's like, okay, but what do you call a myth? Like a myth is something that you've never seen, that someone has told you, that you have no firsthand or direct or indirect evidence of, and you choose to believe it. So it's like, yeah, like in that scenario, regardless of what you believe on either side, like that person had less evidence than my friend did because they knew less about the overall topic and had less indirect exposure to it. And so that's kind of the pain in the butt type of person that you will get if you're you homeschool your kids. They want to know, and they will know, and they will figure out and have a well reason for why they believe what they believe. And I think that's good in a person. And it can lead to bad outcomes, just like anything can. But I think in general it's a good thing.
Have you watched It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia at all?
I need to. I've only watched a
Okay.
couple episodes.
There's a clip that is exactly that, where they're debating evolution versus creationism, and they just go through the whole thing where kind of the dumb guy who's defending creationism against the perceived smart guy who's defending evolution. And they do this exact whole thing where you've probably seen the clip somewhere, but he's like, science can make you a liar. And he goes through all the examples of people proving, like Galileo disproving certain people, but then Isaac Newton disproving Galileo in certain things, and all these different examples. And then finally, the smart guy's like, oh, I don't need to believe you on all this. Like this, the scientists have they've all settled this, like it's already done. And then the guy's like, interesting, so you're saying a bunch of old men who have a book of notes that you haven't read and you haven't seen and you haven't verified, you believe, because that sounds like faith. And then I was like, oh, it's
I have seen that. I have
Yeah.
seen that. That's a great clip.
It's exactly this in the
Yep.
in that mode. It's a very funny show.
Oh man, I'll have to go see where that's streaming. I've been meaning to watch that show.
Yeah, I liked the first seasons. It gets a little lamer towards the end, but it's still running, so maybe it's still good. I don't know.
All right, moving on to our next one. We've got the classic school bus being pushed out of the way by train meme. And in this meme, for those of you who are listening, the school bus says, we need to use wind and solar power and reduce our energy use. And then the train barreling through, we need to go nuclear and triple our energy consumption. What do you think?
I like this take.
Yep.
It's again maybe a little hyperbolic,
Yes.
but one, we do need to go nuclear, and I do think that the narrative right now is about a lot of conserving of energy. And what I don't like the way that we cede that territory over to what I would call the progressive view of this debate. I don't think that the idea of conservation is necessarily wrong or bad. I do believe in conserving nature when possible, and not being destructive for its own sake, and all these kinds of things. Like, responsibility is paramount and tantamount. We're recording this on Earth Day, so like I think
we are, huh?
We are, yeah. And I think these things are important, and I think that individuals generally have better incentives to do that. But what I will say is that when we're talking about conservation, that also needs to be balanced by manipulation of the world around us to do life preserving ends, to reach the means of energy consumption can be used for life preserving ends and for conservation. And so what I mean by that is, if you were to look at the destruction of the planet in general, a lot of destruction happens through natural causes and natural events. And one of the ways that you can protect life, you can protect areas, is by using energy to build infrastructure that helps you do that, right? You think about, if we're worried about human life, which I think is the ultimate value here, there were natural disasters that we would have no preparation for, and people would just be dead to. Even if you could dig a hole in the ground for yourself and cover it over and be safe from, like a dust storm or a hurricane or something. Like, if you're an agrarian society, that just devastated your crops. So how do you feed people then? Well, you work on preservatives. You work on exponentially increasing your output for and saving and creating food. You work on shelters that can protect you from that kind of thing. You work on technology that can help you detect where these things are going and when they're going to go, so that you can move and you can evacuate. Doubling down and tripling down on our energy consumption, when used responsibly, not just for its own sake, not in a wasteful manner, not in a I'm gonna leave the coal engine running to pollute the air for funsies, but when you're doing it in a way that is productive and creating ways for people to preserve themselves, to preserve food, to preserve resources, even to preserve environments around them, like parks and like forests and things like that. Using energy is a means to achieve that more effectively and efficiently, and fight off natural decay and natural disasters. Because even if you wiped off every human from the planet, there would still be destruction and things happening. The question is, how do you best reduce those impacts? And the best way to do that, whether it's protecting humans from nature or nature from nature, is through wise, efficient energy consumption. So I think for anyone who's looking and wants a little bit more in-depth analysis of that perspective, I highly recommend reading Alex Epstein's work. He's phenomenal at, I think, shifting the narrative on this particular debate.
Yeah. I can't remember who I heard talking about this. It was some energy expert regarding pipelines in Canada and running them through the United States and everything. And he had done this really cool analysis on environmental impacts of pipelines versus not having a pipeline and having your fuel transferred via normal vehicles. And it once you kind of you don't even have to like read the study, you just think about it like, oh yeah, like sending oil through a pipeline versus having it shipped all over the place on trains and trucks and semi trucks, like which seems more efficient and more safe and less prone to like waste and accidents and things like that. It's like, it's obviously it's the pipeline, right? So when you account for that, even with the land being destroyed and things like that, from a pipeline, it's much more safe to use technology rather than using old, outdated methods of transporting, fuel and energy. And there's a direct correlation to human prosperity and efficient types of energy being built. And so that's when people say we need to use wind and solar to reduce our energy use, it's actually no. Like I think we should be trying to have more and more energy being used in a more and more efficient manner, because when more energy is used, that means people are able to have things that they otherwise would not been able to have at less cost. And we get kind of this weird because we're so obfuscated and abstracted from like how energy is produced, we've kind of forgotten what it actually is. And I was looking up this I saw this YouTube video on like how to create a battery out of like a gallon of water. And it was really interesting and funny and kind of tongue in cheek, but basically it was saying like, hey, a battery is really just a store of energy. So this guy, what it is, he took a solar panel and he used that solar panel to pump water from the base of his house when it rained all the way up to the top of his house in like this big tank of water. And then during times when he wanted to use the energy, like he would basically release a hose, and then the water with gravity would travel down and then spin a rotator, which would generate power for like a light. Right. So literally energy is like the ability to move something, right, at a certain speed and with a certain amount of force and things like that. And so when you think about wind and solar and all that stuff, like energy has a couple different characteristics in terms of how it relates to our day-to-day use. And it's like wind and solar, like, yeah, they can produce it when the wind is blowing and when the sun is shining, but they will not be generating energy when the wind is not blowing and when the sun is not shining. All right. You need to have some sort of heat. So you have to actually store that energy in batteries, and like think about what it takes to construct a battery that's efficient and stores energy without loss. It's like, oh yeah, like they freaking go to the Congo and they have slaves mining it with their bare hands, in the worst type of conditions, definitely not environmentally friendly in any way, right? And if you look at like a Tesla, like what it takes to build a Tesla car with the battery and everything else, and it's like, yeah, it basically barely edges out like a gasoline car in terms of the amount of impact to the environment. So in terms of like efficiency of use and reliability and the ability for it to be used on demand, nuclear energy is the best out there that you could ever have, because it's so compact for how much heat it generates, and it can be used at any time that you want it to, regardless of whether it's blowing wind or the sun is shining or the water is running. It works great. And yes, because of all the different things that we've had in terms of like Fukushima and Chernobyl and stuff, like people have kind of like a bad picture in their mind of what can happen. But what's funny, and this no surprise here, like most of those issues that occurred were because the government was involved, not because the private sector was running the nuclear power plant. So yeah, the more energy we use, the better. And if we're using energy, might as well do nuclear because it's so much more efficient and cheaper.
Well, and to that point, the if I recall, I could be speaking out of turn here, but I believe I was reading somewhat recently that with Fukushima and other larger reactors, those ones were, I think, like essentially version 2 nuclear reactors. And since then there have been developments that make smaller, less dangerous versions, but because of those, the government said, nope, we have to ban this, put a moratorium on it. There's no way we're going to allow this anymore. And then it's like, so now the only ones that are in production and that are being used,
Are the unsafe
not
ones.
as much, are the unsafe large ones, instead of allowing
Yeah.
the newer, more safe ones to come in, be built, and replace and outmode the old ones. So once again, government stepping in to say, hey, hold on, we're going to make the situation worse. Don't worry, everyone. We've got this. Back off. We're going to ruin everything.
All right, moving on to our next one. We've got a post, and who it's by is kind of important. So it's an art piece by Henry J. Garrett. He's a kind of a leftist artist, and it's being reposted by the Facebook page, the other 98%, and also a very leftist page. But they write, it's a picture of a kite being flown, and with the caption, "No amount of propaganda should convince you that some children don't deserve to grow up." What do you think?
Is there's context for this?
It's for the Gaza. Sorry, I should have said that. It's for the stuff that's going on in Gaza right now.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
got the
No.
Gazan flag colors or the Palestinian
Oh,
colors.
I see. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I guess that's a good take. I mean, it's maybe not the most effective thing to convince someone who is going to be in the tank for the Israel lobby. I don't think, but
No.
I've also just seen layers and layers of arguments back and forth on that. So I don't know that you can have anything concise and in that. But yeah, like to the point where you are sort of, at least if you've gotten to the point where you are so um entrenched in your views of this conflict that you sort of gloss over or blow over any of the lost life, really on either side, that's the moment to maybe take pause and reflect on what your actual values are and what you're defending. And to be clear, that's true for whether you're supporting the Palestinian Gazan people who are getting bombed, or the Israeli children who were, or innocent people there who were being murdered on like October 7th. It's easy to point at something like October 7th and say, see, this is why you have to commit atrocities against
Yeah.
people in Gaza because of events like that. But really, when you look at the sheer numbers, Israel is responsible for a
Much more.
vastly higher number of innocent civilians who have been lost. And you can say, on, well, they have, these ratios or whatever, but at that point you are again buying numbers they give you. You're ignoring on the ground footage, you're ignoring internationally provided numbers and internationally verified numbers. There's a lot of tit for tat sort of, well, they're provoking, they're not. The point is, if you're so callous to the point that and I don't think everyone who is pro-Israel is this way, but if you are like Laura Loomer, for instance, who, gosh, she had a really bad take today earlier. I almost grabbed, actually. Let me see if I can find it. But if you're at her point where it's like you're saying, I don't even care about the innocent people dying on one side. This side is right no matter what. Then you need to, like, no. Like, take a step back and always consider, like even if you think that Israel's way overrepresented bombing and murder of innocents is justified, you should at the very least acknowledge the serious gravity that is.
Yes.
And I think that that's a part of the problem, is that people don't have the balance of the actual losses and the actual destruction being caused and the actual weight of that in retaliation.
Yeah. Yeah, I originally saw this post by someone who's fairly lefty and very, like, this is low hanging fruit, but I think it's an obvious one that we should point out, especially as it relates to like being principled. This person is very pro-choice, pro-abortion, pro-murdering children in the womb, and when you look at, like, I think it's a valid criticism of the left, of the right, and when I say the right, like conservatives in America, when they say, "Oh, well, you're just not pro-life, you're pro-birth." In that the people that are saying, hey, we need to, do away with abortion, but also let's go freaking melt the flesh off of children on the other side of the country, on the other side of the world, because we have certain types of interests. It's like, yeah, that person is not necessarily pro-life. I think that's like a valid criticism, but the opposite goes the same way, right? Like, you can't be posting this thing and saying that, like, hey, you shouldn't be propagandized and be taught that some children don't deserve to grow up, when you're literally killing them in the womb because of propaganda that tells you that, well, a woman's right to choose is more important than a child's ability to exit the womb and grow up. So I always thought that was kind of interesting, like how both sides like kind of get pitted against each other and can clearly see like the hypocrisy of each other, but they never see it within themselves. And I guess maybe that's a warning, a representation for all of us to look at ourselves. But I think that, like, it's easy for you and I to see these things because there's an actual principle we stand on, whether it works out good or bad for our team or tribe or libertarian tribe or whatever you want to call it. It's always funny that, like, the libertarians have a political group because it's like, I don't know, it's like It just almost sounds like an oxymoron in some ways to be that way. But like we have a principle, and because we have a principle and we filter everything that comes in to our brains through that principle, usually we have a pretty like uniform and standardized and predictable, and not in a bad way predictable, in a good way predictable reaction to different types of things that are happening in the world because it's filtered by that. So yeah, this is a good take, but like I wish this take was like the principle that undergirded it was actually applied everywhere for these folks, and it's obviously not. And I've told this person that posted it before. I'm like, you and I agree on the Israel Gaza conflict. Like we agree that it's wrong and bad, but like we have different reasons for believing that it's wrong and bad. Like you believe it's wrong and bad because Israel is like white and a colonial whatever. I believe it's wrong and bad because like yeah, the Palestinians were kicked out of their homes and you have children being killed. Like our primary reasons. I maybe this person also agrees that that's bad, but you know my primary reason is informed by that, not by some weird woke leftist idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I will say the initial thing you point out, the irony of the abortion stance with this is very striking, right? Like that's the most innocent and the most egregious genocide being carried out. And
the
then
most propagandized in many ways.
and the most propagandized, absolutely right. So here I want to really quickly jump to Laura Loomer's awful take here because this ties into how much like if people are saying, oh, you're just characterizing one side as being heartless and stuff. I'm not saying most or all people are this way, but this is the propaganda that's out there. This is the radical views that are being expressed. Again, it's a fringe side of conservatism saying this, but it's a growing side. Laura Loomer tweets, I genuinely have zero compassion or sympathy for Gaza. I feel nothing for them. Many people are just like me, but they're afraid to say it. Be proud. I am very proud. Be proud of you who are. Be proud of who you are, and take pride in not having sympathy for bloodthirsty Hamas terrorists and their supporters who cry out in pain as they strike you. We are on the right side of history. People who support Gaza will not be remembered kindly in history.
No.
And then someone had responded, "What about innocent children? Do you have sympathy for them?" And her response is, the children of Gaza are being programmed to grow up and become terrorists like their parents. Children as young as 4 are given toy guns and are taught to recite the Hamas charter. They teach children in kindergarten in Gaza that it's okay to murder Jews. How is that acceptable? And it's like, okay, there's a couple things there. But first of all, I like someone on the first tweet who had responded, like I have zero sympathy, quoting her tweet. I have zero sympathy for the children we are slaughtering. Well, not an actual quote, but a paraphrase. And then everyone hates us for no reason. And it's like,
yeah.
One,
they hate us for our freedom.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, yeah, they're growing up and becoming radicalized terrorists. Maybe because you're bombing them and you have no sympathy for it and you have no remorse for it. Like maybe that's the cycle that's continuing. So anyway, I just wanted to call that out because as scary as it is, that kind of take is growing to some degree. So even as ironic as this take is coming from the people it comes from, this is a good take and needs to be reminded. Even if you're supporting Israel and their campaign, like don't become so deluded and sort of lost in your view that you are losing your principle. Because even if we disagree on what the best way to preserve life is, that is ultimately what this is really should be about, at least.
Yeah. All right, moving on to our next one. Oh boy. So we've got a series of X posts. So the first one is from Ian Miller, and he's tweeting at Mark Cuban, and he writes, "Hey Mark, just wondering if you or your corporations pay more than the required taxes in order to pay your fair share. Thanks so much." Fun and awesome question. And Mark Cuban, quote, reposts it and writes, "I pay what I owe. Tomorrow I will wire transfer to the IRS $288 million. This country has done so much for me. I'm proud to pay my taxes every single year. Tag a former president that you know doesn't." And he follows that up. "I was wrong with my number yesterday. Got the final number and the wire is complete." I think you said it was like $270 something million. Wanted to be accurate. Do I expect all of that money I spent? Sorry, say again?
But sorry, it's in the I think it's, let's see, thousand million. I'm sorry, 280 or 275 million. You're right. Sorry.
$275 million. So he's like, hey, I was wrong about that number yesterday. Got the final number and the wire is complete. I wanted to be accurate. Do I expect all of it to be used wisely? Of course not. But I'm still proud to be able to give back to our country. I've said it for years. After military service, paying your taxes is the most patriotic thing we can do. What do you think about Mark Cuban's philosophy on taxes?
It is ridiculous, and just one of the things about it that I find so funny is the initial question is just wondering if you or your corporations pay more than your required taxes for the fair share, and then he brags about the number that he does pay. But the funny thing there is he's saying I pay what I owe, which is to say, well, if you think that the standard of what other people should be paid is rising, because I think he was talking about like Donald Trump avoiding taxes or something like that. If you think that the burden is that on the rich, then you should be paying more because the standard they currently have, which you don't think is adequate, that's what you say you're owing. So it's a moving target there to begin with. But moreover, most importantly, the highlighted part of this, do I expect all of it to be used wisely? Of course not. But I'm still proud to get that's it. I know that Mark Cuban is very successful, but it's pretty clear to me that he has a willful ignorance and a blind spot here about the absolute level of the absolute lack of incentives that the government structure has compared to a normal business. If you run a big business and if you've been a part of a lot of ventures and they've been successful, they've had to have efficiency components to a certain degree. Like obviously, the bigger you get, the more there's going to be sort of fat that could be trimmed off, but you're just going to accrue that with size. And because you have good enough margins, you're going to be able to cover for that. But the fact that he's not able to sort of process the idea that even if the government had good intentions, even if they weren't soulless, mindless creeps, the fact that you can't recognize that there and the scale of the government, the ineptitude of the government, and the corruption of the government is so vast that your money is not it's not a matter of do I expect all of it to be used wisely? Do you expect any of it to be used wisely? Like that's the question. It's the burden shouldn't be, well, there might be parts of this that are used inefficiently. It's like, no. How much of that do you think is going to be used efficiently? Because clearly not. And then when you take it to the further level about the absolute atrocities that money commits, when you think about like foreign policy and the world building and the enforcement of awful laws against people to take over their land, like I don't know, man. I feel like you have to be turning a pretty big blind eye to see the behemoth of the government that everyone like when you talk about legislators and the federal government in general, everyone polling just hates. Everyone thinks it's wrong. Everyone thinks it's corrupt. Everyone thinks it's going in the wrong direction. And then you give $275 million to it and think, no, I'm proud to do that. Like, like some of it won't be used well, but a lot of that's going to work out. It's like, why? What gives you that signal? What on earth indicates to you that the thing with massive disapproval ratings and massive corruption every day and massive amounts of sloth and and atrophy, like that's something that where your money is going to be used wisely at all, and then you're proud of that? Just boggling, man.
Yeah. I I agree with you that like he's got a massive blind spot. Like if I told you that there is a charity, like you had $100 million, you worked your whole life or whatever, and you're going to get taxed 10 million on it. So you got $10 million and you have to give it to a charity and you can kind of select it. And I'm trying to pitch you on this charity. I say, oh yeah, this charity's great. You know, they go build homes for kids in poor countries and they make clean water and they help educate and provide services and get people up on their feet and provide interest-free loans so that people can start up their businesses. And yeah, like their the ratio of their the spending skews a little bit towards the administrators. Like the administrators are getting rich off of it. So if you give them $10 million, like maybe $3 million will be used for causes and $7 million will be given to the administrators. Like that would be like, okay, maybe whatever. But there one caveat, right? Like not only are you going to have to give 10 million, you're going to have to give 15 million actually, because we're determining what you owe. And that extra 5 million that you're going to give, we're going to go use it to kill innocent people. That charity sounds pretty good, right? Because I mean, they're using most of it wisely. I mean, there's a little bit being given, shaved off the top to give to make people rich, and there's that little bit about we're going to go kill innocent people and harm innocent people, but like it's a good charity, wouldn't you agree? It's like, no, it does not matter what amount of like money is used, even if all of it was given to people, except for the one bit that is used to kill 1,000 people that are innocent or something like that. It's like, yeah, that disqualifies the whole thing at that point. It's like you would not give your money to something you knew was that you knew could be used to hurt innocent people. If you're a good person, that is, and you don't have these blinders on. And so all of this other stuff aside about whether the money is used efficiently or inefficiently, or if it's in the best hands to be used efficiently, we do know for a fact that it is used efficiently to kill innocent people and to perpetuate machines of war upon small, little people in countries that don't deserve to be hurt at all. So, that alone to me would be enough. That's like, I don't want to pay taxes because I don't support that type of thing going on. And the fact that it's taken from me at force does not make it ethical in any way. And it also makes me pretty skeptical of any of the other stuff that they say they're going to use for my own benefit here back at home.
That's it. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I mean, and that's assuming, even in that's sort of sad to say, a best case scenario in the sense that you're assuming that the government is able to do things well. And I think you've pointed out in previous episodes that the charity statistics, about private charities, 80-20, I think roughly
70-30.
70-30 in terms of usage.
At worst case.
Worst case of 70% of the money you give goes to the actual services, 30 to sort of internal type things. And it's flipped with the government. And then I mean, I don't even want to get started on if you think about in terms of the success rate of the projects. Like, that's not even accounting for how the money is being used in terms of output. And obviously the scale of government makes that hard, and they say, oh well, the government's just going to get the hardest cases and the breadth, you can't address that. And it's like, no, that's why you need a bunch of smaller organizations. Like having big networks is great, but you need local smaller things to tackle. And a great example is in local area where I live, Pierce County, there's a group called Network Services Tacoma. They're a charity that specifically tries to get homeless people into housing. They have affordable housing units that they help provide for people who are willing to work. And so they get them into, like, I think it's maybe like a 1-year program or something, where they get them jobs and they have them working. Network Services Tacoma. Absolutely incredible organization. And they have about a 70% success rate of getting people who come to their program out of their transitional housing into homes. So they get people out of homelessness, off the streets. Now, is that as big of an organization as the federal government's homeless or housing and homeless program? No. But the point is that, like, where it's working and where it is localized and effective as a private organization, it's having a 70% success rate. I don't know of any government programs that have that high of a success rate for something
that's
as
amazing.
Prominently detrimental as
anyone who's worked with that stuff knows it's really difficult to get someone out of that cycle of homelessness. So that's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. So there's just so many layers to how wrong Mark Cuban is. it's just frustrating to see someone sort of without questions give over that kind of cash to the government.
All right, moving on to our next one. We've got Jeremy Boring, and he originally tweets, "People who deny the moon landing or suggest America is evil for its use of atomic weapons against Imperial Japan, or who say that George Bush was behind 9/11 actually hate this country." Obviously talking about homeschoolers. And then someone replies to him, and there it is. Jeremy and the Daily Wire just insulted the core of their fan base, who ardently believe killing babies with nukes is immoral and that 9/11 was indeed an inside job. And Jeremy replies, wait, you believe the core of the Daily Wire audience believes America was the bad guy in World War II and that 9/11 was an inside job? LOL. And Robert Murphy, the Economist, took a snapshot of all these different takes. And he goes, note the rhetorical sleight of hand. The critic said rightfully or wrongfully that the core of the Daily Wire audience doesn't support the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. And Jeremy Boring changed it to, the U.S. was the bad guy in World War II. Are there any honest men in political discourse? What do you think?
No. Well, except for us. We're the only ones. us
We're
and maybe
trying to
Dave
be.
Smith.
We're trying to be
Yeah,
honest.
trying to be. Yeah.
That's an important distinction. Yeah.
Well, well, I guess by honest, I mean like not intentionally deceiving. I'm not
Yes.
saying there can't be a slip up here or there. So feel free to call us out on that. But yeah, no, I appreciate Bob's call out here. I think for someone like Jeremy Boring, I think I think he's right. I think that this is sort of a rhetorical device that I don't know if Jeremy is trying to be as sinister and slimy, or if he's just trying to put it in the most rhetorically convincing light to base on his side. I would wager a guess that for a lot of people, I don't know about Jeremy Boring. I genuinely don't. But for a lot of people, those things are synonymous. Saying the use of atomic weapons against Imperial Japan and saying America was the bad guy in World War II, like, or sorry, saying that someone was evil for using the atomic weapons and saying that America was the bad guy in World War II. I think for a lot of people in their reductionist way that they've been taught, those are synonymous. They don't know the history. They don't know the context. They don't know the absolute depravity of the situation that led us into World War II and all these things. You know, the way that FDR put our soldiers out to be bombed at Pearl Harbor, the way that Japan was willing to negotiate as long as they got to keep their emperor and all these kinds of things, which we let them do after the bombing. You know,
Yeah.
the way that we targeted civilian districts rather than military ones. And so for a lot of people, all they know is that they hear we had to use the nuke and it was the only way to end the war, and Japan was evil. And to be fair, a lot of what Japan was doing was awful and terrible. I like
Yes.
they had bad things. That does not mean that targeting civilians was the right course of action. It does not mean that intentionally putting our troops out to get bombed so that we would get involved was the right course of action. It doesn't mean it's like people can't fathom that. And I would say this for our side too. Sometimes it's hard for people to fathom that bad things can happen and good outcomes can occur from that. That doesn't justify the bad thing, but also it doesn't. It also means you have to recognize that there can be good things from bad things happening. For instance, I would say that Japan turning away from its imperial status and sort of the culture there in some ways was a very positive thing. But I also would say that it was not worth the price of dropping a nuke on innocent
No.
people. And so there's a lot to be said there. But from Jeremy's original take about hating the country, it's crazy to think that you have to hate the United States and to believe any of those things. In particular, it's very weird to say that, like, oh, if you think George Bush was behind 9/11, you hate America. When you would be, I feel like the point would be saying, no, the government is specifically doing things to undermine the principles of America. The things that we like about this country are being undermined by people in power, and that's why it's wrong. It's a very reductionist way of to think, oh, if you disagree with the official narrative, you hate the country.
It was very reminiscent of George. Like, his take here is very reminiscent of George Bush's, like, you know, you're either with me or you're my enemy, which is also Anakin's from the Revenge of the Sith quote. So, and it's really sad because he kind of gives away his hand, and I guess I'm glad to know it now. That I canceled my Daily Wire subscription a long time ago. I subscribed when they put out What Is a Woman, because, like, well, if I'm going to spend money to go see movies made by people that hate me, I might as well spend money on something made by someone that kind of supports my worldviews. So that's what got me in, but this is definitely what's gotten me out. Their whole treatment of Candace Owens in this, because it's obvious that he has a priority and a principle higher than actual right and wrong, which is like, oh, this country needs to exist and, you know, America can do no wrong and they hate us for our freedom kind of logic. Because, like, can't you, like, recognize that America has potentially done wrong? Or maybe you should point to a time, Jeremy Boring, where America has done wrong, and maybe it was wrong and it also advanced our interests. Right. Because, like, Jeremy Bourne, I think, would be the type of argument he seems to be making is that, hey, if something advanced our interests, like, you shouldn't criticize it. It's like, no, that's not, even I would argue that, like, dropping the nuclear bomb on Hiroshima did not necessarily advance our interest in the way that we would want it to, because now we've put the world under basically threat and opened the door for all sorts of awful and evil things. But yeah, it made it so we didn't have to, quote unquote, invade Japan, even though, like you were saying, the entire history of them being willing to surrender and all that stuff. And it shouldn't be like, this is just how pervasive the propaganda is. Like, it shouldn't be controversial to say that, like, hey, the side that was okay burning babies in the thousands and tens of thousands and innocent civilians in the hundreds of thousands is on the wrong side for doing that. Like, there is no goal that justifies that. Even if you are threatened with that same outcome, if it's a true like standoff situation where it's like it's that guy or me, like you're still like that's not even analogous to what's going on because it's an innocent person, right? So it's like, yeah, there's just no scenario where the person that chooses to do the thing against the innocent is the good guy. So I don't. It's really sad to see him kind of throw out his principles there. And as Robert Murphy was saying, you know, it is a rhetorical sleight of hand. It's saying like, oh well, you're saying that because we won the war and you didn't like the way that we won the war, suddenly we're the bad guy in World War II. It's like, no, like you could like be. I think you and I would maybe disagree regardless of whether someone is, whether the United States was or was not the hero in World War II. But like that does not inevitably follow by saying like, hey, we shouldn't have done that. In the same way that like if I question the way that U.S. soldiers treated folks in the Middle East or in, you know, various types of what was it, we talked about it in on Cringe Post at one point, but there was basically where the U.S. soldiers in Vietnam went and raped and massacred a village. It's like, yeah, we could say that like we were the bad guys in Vietnam in a lot of ways, but you know what I'm trying to say? Like, if you criticize soldiers for doing immoral acts, that does not mean and inevitably follow that like, hey, something was wrong or that you aren't the heroes in the overall conflict or whatever. And it's kind of weird to be making that argument because we don't really agree with war at all. But like, that's the rhetorical sleight of hand and the trick that Jeremy Boren is trying to play because he knows it will kind of play to his audience and the way that they think. So yeah, Daily Wire has become dishonest and maybe always was, but now is just kind of having their hand revealed. And I've canceled my subscription. I will not support them financially because I think that, you know, I subscribe because I want to support people that didn't hate me, but I've come to believe and think that maybe they actually don't really like me in general.
it's certainly possible, especially if if the list starts with denying the moon landing, atomic bomb dropping was wrong, and George Bush was behind 9/11. You hate the country. If that's the starting point for such an extreme reaction, yeah, I don't know. I think he might hate you. More than he lets on.
Yeah. Cool. I don't have any more unless you do.
I think we're good.
Awesome. Friends, thanks so much for hanging out. We really appreciate it. Again, please leave a comment, like, share, subscribe. We really appreciate it. And we'll catch you on the next one.